Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shay Wissell, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country, and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series. Today, I've got a fantastic colleague of mine who's joining from Texas in the US, Malvika. And we're here today to talk about mental health and wellbeing, and also the launch of our new program, Our Minds Matter, which kicks off this year, which is 2024. So I think this must be our, 63rd podcast we're going to release. Actually, I've lost count. I'll have to pull up our podcast show as we're talking, but we're in our 60s now. So, and this will be the first one for 2024 if people are listening in order. If not, now you know where we are in the time period. But welcome, Malvika, to the show. I'm so pleased that we're able to have this conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this.
So, Malvika, can you how did you get into supporting children and adults with dyslexia around mental health and wellbeing?
Sure. So right now, I work as an associate professor at West Texas A&M, which is here in Texas. In 2018, I had somebody from a state-level organization reach out to me and say, hey, we wanted you to do a presentation on mental health of parents or caregivers of children with learning disabilities. And I was like, sure, let me look into that. And that kind of gave me a push or a start to understand what it's like, what the mental health is like for parents and then children. And then we connected and we started talking about adults, and then we went from there. Most of the time, after I did some research, I also did some support groups for parents, and most of the parents had a learning disability. So they had a learning disability, and they had kind of either their child had it or somebody in their care had it. And we would talk about how that impacted their mental health as an adult. And I never really thought about how it would impact an adult with learning disability, how the transition or how having a learning disability impacts you as an adult, until we kind of connected and we started talking about this. And then I started doing more research regarding that. Currently, I just finished data collection, we just talked about this, on the emotional regulation of adults with learning disabilities to understand what kind of emotional problems they face. Because when children are diagnosed with learning disabilities in kind of a school setting, once they graduate, there's no really transition plan from school to college to work that I know of. So it's important that we recognize that and kind of address it to help adults kind of transition out of school and into the world and get the jobs or the positions or the career that they want to, and kind of help them with that transition.
Well, there's so many things we could unpack here. And I'm going to try really hard to keep us to half an hour, because my podcasts always end up going for an hour. And I know we're going to do later in the year, part of our series is family dynamics. But a lot of the adults you were talking to, so they hadn't had the opportunity to be diagnosed yet? Was it a recognition after their children have been diagnosed that was most likely coming from them, or were these adults that had had the opportunity to be diagnosed as well?
Some of them had the opportunity to be diagnosed. Some of them were suspected. And some of them, they were confirmed once their children were confirmed. So it was more like, oh, I see that I had that as a child as well. Most of the parents, not most, but some of the parents were aware of what learning disabilities and dyslexia was before their child started to get the diagnosis. Others had not really heard about it, had not really experienced it, had never really been diagnosed with it. But when their child got diagnosed, it was like a light bulb.
Some people call it a revelation.
Yes.
Yes.
A revelation.
And so what were some of so you started out looking at how parents could support their children, but it ended up being a support
I started
group.
Looking at how parents could support themselves while caring for a child with learning disability. And that's where I started. That was the first thing that I started to do. From there, I went to children with learning disabilities and what is the impact on their mental health. And then from there, I went to, okay, there are adults here as well. How are we transitioning these children that we're looking into the workforce? And from what I see, there's no transition plan. There is, here in school, I'll give you these accommodations, and then you can figure it out once you go to work.
And that's all of the work we do is around how do we support that transition period into the workplace or into higher education. Or we find a lot of adults coming to us because, one, they've been diagnosed later in life, or they're just struggling to manage and to retain their job. And there isn't, as far as I know either, there isn't any transition planning to support young people. And what we're hoping to do is be able to work with schools and to be able to do that transition piece, because I think a lot of it, and you've worked in the space, but what I've seen is that self-advocacy piece is really not there, because we don't know how to self-advocate and we don't know how to disclose to get the support we need. Have you found that through your work?
That is correct. Some of the parents were working to have their children advocate for themselves. So here in the US, they have like meetings where the teachers would say, here is the accommodations that I can give. And then they would have the child decide what accommodations would work for them and what wouldn't, and kind of verbalize that during the meeting. While there were other parents who had not really reached that point yet and weren't really working with their kids for the self-advocacy part of it. But at the same time, when we say, oh, you should advocate for yourself, and there is a lot of stigma with having a learning disability. There's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to having a learning disability. There are studies that have been done that say, there's no difference in IQ for somebody with learning disability versus without learning disability. But then there's so much stigma around it that people don't really want to talk about having a learning disability to anyone.
Are there any strategies you talk with either your young people or parents around how we can reduce that stigma? I find in Australia that we don't have a lot of leaders or people in their careers that are coming forward to say it's okay. It feels like the autistic community have done this really, really well of coming out and being proud of being autistic and asking for the accommodations they need. And we're starting to see that in Australia with ADHD as well. A lot of people posting and talking about it, but we don't seem to have a lot of Australian leaders talking about it. So how do we reduce the stigma? Have you seen anything in the US? to help?
I think there's just a lack of knowledge. People don't know what learning disabilities are. My partner, who's an engineer and he does engineer stuff, he and I have talked about it a lot, and he's talked about how, until we actually had a conversation, there wasn't really anything before that he had actually learned what learning disabilities are. So there's no really conversation around it. There's no real education around it. It's just, oh, the person who has learning disability or knows somebody that has a learning disability probably knows about it, versus there are others who are completely in the dark and don't really know what learning disabilities are. A lot of times people learn from movies, and there are movies out there that have depicted learning disabilities as such, some accurate, most not. But they've talked about it and they've tried to bring awareness for it, but I don't think that's worked. As you said, having leaders out there who share their experiences, who state the fact that I have a learning disability and this is how it impacted me. These are the strategies that I used, and this is what has helped. Could be so much more helpful than some movie made by some director somewhere where there might be inaccuracies.
What I find is that there's a lot of famous people that have stepped forward.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of actors from the US and the UK, and then we've got Sir Richard Branson, which is fantastic. But I wish we could have some people that were in different work industries to demonstrate the variety and the different contexts, that we're not all artists and we're not all, actors, that we're actually everywhere doing all different jobs. And it would be great to be able to see people from all different types of fields come forward to help reduce that stigma. And we're going off on a tangent here, but stigma impacts our mental health and well-being. But how did you get into this space? Because you're an ally. Is there a particular reason why you were drawn to working in learning difficulties and dyslexia?
I personally think that I had dyscalculia. I think that my math was really hard for me. It wasn't something that I've ever been able to do. Luckily, I wasn't until 12th grade, I was in India. So I didn't have to do math after 10th grade. So that kind of worked out well for me. But I could barely, it was something that I could barely do, and I really struggled with it, almost all my life. I had kind of put some pointers down that we wanted to talk about. One of the biggest things with stigma that comes with impacting your mental health is what your teacher or your boss or your coworker thinks about it. And it's like when you're in school and you're not able to do something, and you have somebody say, "Oh, it's not a learning disability, you're just lazy," or "It's not a learning disability, you're just," I don't know if I can say that. Stupid? Can I say stupid on the phone?
Yes, because a lot of us have been told that. We've been told we're stupid and lazy and dumb, and lots of other descriptive words that are not nice at all to hear.
Yeah, that are not nice. And when you're told that over and over again, even for an entire year, that impacts your mental health. That impacts what you think, how you feel about yourself. And we had this conversation the last time we met. Like, even as adults, it impacts you. And, you have to really work to not react to certain things that are said to you, or to certain conversations that you have, because that word lazy or stupid or dumb that was said to you once is still somewhere in the back of our head, and it has long-term implications. Sometimes when I'm talking to my partner, something will be said, and that will be a trigger which will cause me to become defensive. And that just And that just spirals. There's no way of coming out of that. In that moment, that just spirals. It's just really important that we understand that when you have a learning disability and when you have been called words like lazy, stupid, dumb, or any kind of names that might impact your self-esteem, that has long-term implications. It is not just, oh, I was called that now at the time, but now I'm over it. If anytime somebody underestimates you, it just fuels. Well, anytime somebody, I'm not going to generalize this. So anytime somebody underestimates me, it just kind of fuels the fire and be like, well, I'll show you.
Yes, I think that's why I've done a doctorate. It was I'll show you I'm not dumb. Even though you still have days where you can't do the most basic of things and you think, really? And my family, I say, I'm the one with the doctorate now. And I'm like, but it still doesn't feel like it's enough. So does that reflect your childhood and your difficulties with maths and functional math skills?
I think so. I mean, I don't do math anymore. My husband and I have this running joke where he'll ask me to do something with math, and I'll like take out my calculator and I'll just do the basic thing with my calculator, and then he'll just look at me and say, okay, I'll wait for you to figure that out. And then like he understands that now. We used to really get into it earlier when something would happen and he would say something, and then the walls would go up and that was the end of that. But I think it just makes it's normal. That's what I want to say. When you have a learning disability and you have been called names all your life and you have had to deal with even if bullying at the most basic level in school, outside, there are triggers that impact you long term. And those triggers stay with you until you actually kind of work to get help for it. If you notice any kind of, if and whoever's listening to this podcast can go and think, and if they reflect on the past week, what made you mad, or what made you sad, or what made you angry, you can go back and you can think about it, and you can recognize those triggers, and you can most of the time connect them with something that's happened in the past.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today. Yeah, I think as a parent, for me, it's actually the mental overload that I feel. And then having my toddler talking nonstop to me where I can't address what she's trying to say, or she just won't stop. And I find that my brain can't process all that information at once. And that triggers me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's something.
And how does that make you feel?
I feel overwhelmed and I can't articulate myself. And then I start to get frustrated with myself. And then I get annoyed at her. And then I have to step back and say to myself, she's only nearly 3. She doesn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're tired and you're feeling that overwhelm, that can be a real trigger. Is that something your parent group talked about? Like when their children are doing things and they've got the difficulty, how that can affect them as well as in their relationship?
So for some parents, it was more about, hey, how I went through this, so I will make sure that you have the best resources possible to be able to support you. There were other parents who said, I don't know what it is. I'm just going to rely on the teacher to see what best resources they can provide my child. And then there were some who said, I don't know what it is. They're getting the services that they get. I'm sure they'll figure it out. So there were parents on very different levels who were trying to see, and for some parents, a lot of it is, I have two kids with learning disabilities, and I got to make sure that both of them get the best resources, because I'm sure every parent wants that for their child. And then there's some parents who were so overwhelmed with all the information that was provided to them as soon as their child got diagnosed with a learning disability, that was just hard to process. And that kind of again made their walls go up, made them defensive, and it was hard to kind of have a conversation with someone when they're overwhelmed, they're overloaded with information. You know, you're sitting there, you don't know what it is, and people are just throwing information at you. It's hard.
I'll have to get you to look at my book chapter, because that's going back to the school trauma and then how we react. That's what I found through my research, is that a lot of adults were carrying through that trauma from those labels that they were called, and that impacted them in the workplace and then in their relationships, and then how we respond. But I know that I shut down. I'll either be in fight mode, terrible fight mode, or I will be in shutdown mode, and I won't engage in the conversation if my brain feels overwhelmed, or I feel like I've been made to feel stupid, or sometimes I don't understand the context properly, and so then my response isn't right, particularly if it's in an argument or a heated discussion, because my brain can't process. Again, it's that overwhelm. And then that makes me really angry because I'm not articulating what I'm trying to say.
It's hard. It's hard because you're in the middle of a conversation. You're in the middle of a heated conversation, and you're trying to put your point across. And then the other person is telling you so much, and you're like, this is my point. This is what I'm saying, and the other person keeps talking, and you're just like, yeah, I can't do this. I need to kind of step away.
And you can see how parents could respond in that way, whether they've been told their child's got a diagnosis, or the reflection, like the revelation that actually this is what I've got and I've given it to my child. I'm terrified that Ava will be dyslexic, and it's because I don't want her to go through the struggles that I went through, and Danielle is as well. But I know that she will have all the right resources and she will be fine, because I was fine at the end. But it's hard as a parent to think, what if genetically I've passed on these difficulties, and we're not in a world yet where those difficulties are accepted and we just can get on with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt that comes with parents whose kids have a diagnosis and they have a diagnosis, and the diagnosis is passed down by generations, where parents are like, I gave that. Those struggles that my child has came from me. But they'll figure it out. And if Zoe gets dyscalculia, she'll figure it out. I'm pretty sure. She's a smart cookie. She knows how to. She's almost 2, and she is pretty good at getting what she wants.
She sounds like Ava, almost 3, and now she puts her little hands on her hips. I'm like, where did she even get that from? I'm sure I didn't put my hands on my hips. She's so smart, and of course they will be, and we'll set them up with all the tools. And I think, in one way, I think how privileged and lucky am I that I can do that for my daughter. There must be a lot of families you see that, just rely on the school and don't have the funds and resources to get all the support that their child needs.
Yeah, because, only in the United States, 1 in 16 kids get the accommodation that they need. So there are 15 kids who don't really get a lot of accommodations. So that's a lot of kids. 15 kids is a lot of kids not getting the accommodations that they need to be successful in a school setting.
That's scary. So out of how many children in a classroom? Is it around 30 or 40?
So I think the classroom size is anywhere between 20 to 30. And then 1 in 5 kids have a learning disability. And so a classroom of 20 will have 4 kids.
So your stats are higher. We base ours on 1 in 10. 1 in 5 is large, isn't it? I mean, 1 in 10 is big.
Yeah, 1 in 5 is pretty large. So it's...
And so would that include the 4 kind of disses that we talk about, so dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, and dyspraxia, or are they mainly dyslexic? So under
all
the
4.
umbrella of all 4?
All 4. And then some of them do have dual diagnosis. So they'll have one and the other. And it's just, the diagnosis process is tough. And then you get the diagnosis, and then the reflection, the revelation, all of that is hard. And then finally you get to the accommodations, and some of them get it and some of them don't. And so you're sitting there going, okay, this is the best that we can get at this time, so we'll take it.
And do you see a lot of that co-occurring, so outside of the 4, because I've got dysgraphia and dyslexia, and like dyscalculia, it's not talked about as much. So it's really great for you to be talking about your dyscalculia, because it's not talked about as much as it should, and the prevalence rates are really quite high. Do you see a lot of crossover with outside of the learning disabilities, ADHD and autism and other neurodevelopmental difficulties?
I think so. I think there is, ADHD is pretty prevalent, but sometimes ADHD can be a misdiagnosis because, if I'm sitting in a classroom and I don't understand stuff, I might act out because you told me to stand up and kind of tell you what my answer is, right? That's where I think sometimes that's where the ADHD diagnosis comes from, because they're acting out or they just need to calm down, and the acting out could come from not wanting to be called out as lazy, dumb, or stupid in the classroom setting. But autism definitely, I've seen autism more recently than before. So autism and the learning disabilities kind of more recently. But ADHD, yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think I've referenced 40% of those with ADHD will be dyslexic as well. And I'm pretty sure now, after doing all my work with Judith, she's diagnosed me as ADHD. So at some point I'll get that assessment. But now the more I reflect on it, and it's really hard because you say, well, what is one difficulty versus what is the other? Because there's such crossover. If a child's called up in the classroom and they don't want to engage in that activity, it could be because they're feeling shame about it rather than it being a different type of reason for them not wanting to do it.
Definitely. And it's a lot of it is, I think a lot of it that still goes back to that stigma of teachers have the stigma, parents have the stigma, children don't want to be hauled out. So all that goes back to that.
I feel like we've covered a lot in half an hour. And without unpacking too much, because I don't want to unpack too much because we've got our Minds Matters series coming up. But I think there are a couple of takeaways. I guess there's 3 cohorts we've kind of talked about. It's the children and young people that have a learning difficulty. Then it's the parents who are trying to navigate that and how they support. And then there's the cohort of parents that are dyslexic themselves or have a learning disability themselves, and they're trying to support their children. So out of those 3 cohorts, is there one take home for each cohort, or is that too hard to talk about? We need to wait till we run our sessions.
We can do one takeaway from each sessions. I would say children and young people with learning disabilities, this is kind of their time to learn strategies that they could use to deal with any kind of shame or negative feelings that comes with the diagnosis of learning disability, or when somebody calls you lazy. This is the time to kind of get support and remove those labels that people have put on you.
As in counselling support, because I don't think we said that we didn't say that you were a counsellor, did we?
Oh, yeah. No,
I was just realising as you were talking that we haven't talked about your extensive career in counselling and your PhD in education and counselling, and which is how we got connected through our research.
Yes,
But,
I am
so
a counselor. I'm a
counselling.
licensed professional counselor here in Texas, and I'm a certified school counselor from Ohio. So, yeah, so when just getting that mental health support at a younger age can be very beneficial for you to kind of recognize those triggers and not you'll never leave it behind, but be more mindful of all of that. Um, then there's the cohort of parents of children with learning disabilities. I think connecting with other parents, trying to understand um, what kind of tools that are being used, um, that the other parents are using, and kind of learning from each other. It, the world of learning disabilities can be very isolating. So you want to put yourself out there and get the resources and learn about the resources that you can. And the third one was
Parents that have been diagnosed with learning disability and their children have one too. What can we do? Not that Ava's hasn't been diagnosed yet, so I'm not putting myself in that bracket, but what can parents that have a learning difficulty or disability do to support themselves? I think it's about supporting themselves.
Yeah, I think one of the best things that as a parent you can do is kind of recognize your triggers, get the help that you need to kind of recognize it, and be able to work with your child to, and both and if as parent you don't do this, both you as a parent and your child can work together to learn how to advocate for yourself. So you modeling that behavior for your child and the child being able to follow through with it.
And do you think focusing on, I know with my nephew, my brother and his partner really focused on my nephew's strengths, and he's really good at sport. So, I mean, not all children are good at sport. I definitely wasn't. I'm sure I'm dyspraxic because I'm so poorly coordinated. I'm sure I've got all the 4 disses. But is there something that parents can do around that strength-based approach, not just for their children, but also for themselves?
I mean, everybody has strengths, right? And as somebody who has a learning disability, there is an area which is either explored and you kind of stop looking into it, or there is an unexplored area that you're really good at that would work really well for you. I'm the same way. I don't play sports, but I do CrossFit, and I can do CrossFit like a crazy person all day, every day. And I like weightlifting. And I think that's kind of my strength. And that is what I use as something to help me um, as a coping skill as well. So you have to go out and you have to find your strength. What are some things that you feel you were good at that you can invest your time in? Because finding those strengths help us with our self-esteem as well. It makes us feel better about ourselves. And that is very important in the grand scheme of things, that I like myself and I love myself. And I love the choices that I'm making for myself.
I think that's a really nice message to finish on. And I'm excited that we're going to be working together this year across a number of different topics around coping strategies and parenting and burnout as well. I'm really excited to talk about burnout. And I'd love to have you on the show to talk about dyscalculia a little bit more, because we don't often get to talk about that. And it would be great to kind of unpack how that looks for you and what strategies you use, because I know going through higher education, maths being so difficult for me, that it's really like how you manage to get through with having to do you would have had to do maths as well through your courses, I'm assuming.
I stopped doing math in 10th grade.
So you didn't have to do, because I had to do
India,
stats
I did research, but it wasn't. I'm very good at probability. Like when it comes to mathematics, I can do probability really well. Calculus, algebra, those things were just a simple multiplication, division that I couldn't do. I can do probability really well. But now when it comes to statistics, I've taken some statistics courses. I have had to work 3 times as hard as some of my colleagues to do that. But when it comes to specific mathematics courses, other than statistics courses, I haven't done math since 10th grade.
Well,
so that's how the education system works.
Well, it'd be great to have you back on to talk about, how does it affect you day to day? Like our dyslexia affects us definitely day to day. But I won't sidetrack, and I sidetracked us off that beautiful ending that you had said. But I think I've done pretty well to keeping us near to time this time. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm really excited to do our Facebook Live in the coming weeks to talk about our first Our Minds Matters program that we're running. And I'm super excited about all of the potential work we're going to be doing across research and mental health. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Thanks, Malvika.
Bye.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or BeyondBlue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.